Good afternoon and welcome to today's lunch break with the Rabbi. Today is Wednesday, June 2nd, and it is also the 22nd day of the month of Sivan. Today happens to be also my grandfather, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yaakov Koppel's yahrzeit, so I dedicate today's class in his memory. May his memory be a blessing for all of us. Today, we are going to continue on our discussion about the spies of this week's Torah reading. You know, there was once the story about Joe Biden and his wife, Jill, pulled up to a gas station, and the fellow goes and introduces himself and says, "Hey, Joe, I remember you from way back when. We were classmates." And Joe looks at his wife, Jill, and says, "You see, look where I ended up. If not, I could have been a first lady, or else you would have ended up with this guy being a gas attendant." Jill looks at Joe and says, No. He would have been the president. So, as we're talking about women and men today, our discussion is what can men learn from women based on this week's Torah reading, where we look at and analyze what happened. And this week's Torah reading begins with three words, Shlach lecha anashim. God tells Moses, pick for yourselves men who will go and scout the land of Israel and come back with a report and tell us how the land of Israel is. So as we discussed yesterday, that Shlach lecha means to you that God tells Moses, it's up to you to decide how you want to do it. Pick who you wish. See what kind of benefit you get from it. I told you the land of Israel is good. You want to send people, that's your decision. But there's one commentary that says a very interesting thing. God tells Moses, Shlach lecha anashim. Send for yourself men. Meaning the idea to send men to go scout the land of Israel was Moses' idea. If you really want to get a better report, if you want to have a more accurate, positive report, send women. Now, what is that? Why is that? And the commentator explains, because if you look, 39 years later, there were a group of women who approached Moses and said, why should we not get a part of the land of Israel? And if you contrast what the women wanted and to what the men want, the men were the ones that wanted to stay in the desert, while the women were the ones that wanted to go into the land of Israel. So if you want to get a positive response, why send men, send women? Which begs the question, number one, that episode only happened 39 years later. As they say, don't be a Monday morning quarterback. After they saw what happened, of course they're going to say, yes, we want the land of Israel. But why over here do you think that the women would have had a better response over the men? Which brings us to a larger and greater discussion. In Judaism, there's a concept in Jewish law that women are exempt from any mitzvah which is bound to time. It is for that reason that women don't have to put on tefillin, don't have the obligation of prayer as men do, don't have different obligations, for example, of tzitzit. All those mitzvahs, any mitzvah that's bound to time, women are exempt from. However, should women want to do it? In certain instances, and most instances, for example, listening to the show for making the blessing in the lulav, even though that technically they are exempt from doing it, should they want to do it, they can, of course, do it as well. Also, any mitzvah which is a negative commandment, that's only on positive commandments which are limited to time, they are exempt from. But if it's a negative commandment, they are obligated to do it as well. Or, for example, in the obligation of eating matzah, observing Shabbat, because they were part and involved of that miracle, so they have an obligation to do it as well. So the question is, why are women exempt from those mitzvahs? So in a simplistic way, the very basic reason is because women have obligations of taking care of the children and their household obligations first, and that's their primary, because they're the cultivator, they're the ones that deal with the children. So therefore, in a practical reason, that is their primary obligation before the commandments, and therefore they cannot be limited to a mitzvah which is based on time. That's on the outset. That's a very basic answer that's given. But on the other hand, one can challenge that premise and say, listen, if it's an obligation, what does it make a difference what other obligations you have? Can a man say, because I got to go make a living and therefore I shouldn't pray, put on tefillin, whatever it may be? So it must be something different in the way the Jewish people as men approach God and the way women approach God. And this takes us back all the way to the time of when the Jewish people came out of Egypt, or even when the Jewish people were in Egypt. The way women viewed a situation and their relationship with God, and the way men viewed their relationship with God. Going back, even when the Jewish people were enslaved in Egypt, the Jewish men were under terrible slavery. Who are the ones that had the absolute faith and commitment and know that God will take them out of Egypt? Was the Jewish women. They weren't just satisfied with just a temporary relief. They realized that there's something greater, a greater objective that has to happen here. Take, for example, do you know that according to the Torah, the only one that's obligated in the mitzvah of procreating is a man, not a woman. A woman has no mitzvah to procreate. And the question many asked, how is that possible for the man to procreate if he doesn't have a woman? And the answer is because there is no need to give the woman the obligation, because the woman on her own wants to procreate and realizes the advantages of bringing children into the world, and therefore there's no need to give them an obligation. Women on their own are cultivated and have a desire to become holy and closer to God. Therefore, they don't even need the obligation. And therefore, they're exempt from obligations which are limited to time, because men need that impetus to say, you got to do it now or it's not going to get done. Ask a man when he's going to do it. Next week. And you're going to keep on waiting. But because the women have that impetus to be able to get closer to God, they don't need the extra commandment. Proof in the pudding. God tells the Jewish people to bring donations to build a tabernacle. The obligation was given to the men because they are the ones that sinned with the golden calf. The women didn't take part of it. In fact, when Aaron tells them take off jewelry and bring it, only the men did, not the women. The women did not take part of the sin of the golden calf. So when it came to building the tabernacle to atone for the sin of the golden calf, who were the ones that were obligated to bring? The men. But when it comes to the collection, and at the end, where Moses gathers the Jewish people to see what was brought, the women were brought more than the men. That means without him being obligated, the Jewish women were spending more than the men. We're giving more than the men. We're connected, wanted to bring about the holiness of the tabernacle, even more than the men that had to do it as of repentance. So over here, Moses is told by God, he says, listen here, we have experience. If we want to achieve holiness, if we want to bring holiness into the world, we can't go by the short-sightedness of the men. Yes, the men are conquerors. They want to go out there. But what's the difference? The man, the psyche of the man wants to go out there, conquer and everything else. But at the same time, is a short-lived temptation for something that I can get benefit right now. While the woman is a cultivator and sees a future. A woman has a child for 9 months, cultivating it until it becomes a full-grown child from a fetus. A woman understands and sees that it's not always a temporary pleasure, but it's also a long-term effect, and therefore the woman is the one that invests in the education of the child, which gives that cultivation in the home. The woman is the one who realizes that I can't just leave the house a mess. I need to clean up. I need to make a situation here. I need to make sure that my house is strong in order for me to go outside. The same idea is also when it came to going into the land of Israel. The spies that went into the land of Israel, they were the men. They said, we're happy here in the land of the desert. We're getting all our manna straight from heaven, everything. We don't have to work. It's great. We're doing fine. Why do I need to go into the land of Israel? The women, on the other hand, realized the benefits of the holiness of the land of Israel. They were the ones that later came to Moses and said, why shouldn't we have a part in the land of Israel as well? They complained and demanded a part in the land of Israel. They saw and appreciated the great holiness of the land of Israel. While the men, were already relaxed with their backstage, they weren't interested. Therefore, God says, Shlach lecha anashim, that you decided to send men. That was your intuition. I would have sent women. They would have came back with a positive report. Things would have been much better. Our sages tell us, just like in the time of the Jewish people in Egypt, that it was in the merit of the Jewish women that we were all came out of this exodus, came out of the exile of Egypt and brought about the exodus of Egypt. So too, in this current exile, it is in the merit of the Jewish women. It is in the merit of their righteousness, their faith and belief in God, their commitment to Judaism of cultivating and bringing the next generation of Jews into this world, that we will merit the coming of Mashiach. Wishing you a wonderful day. Looking forward to talking with you again tomorrow, lunch break with the Rabbi at 1 p.m.